This meeting is being recorded.
Okay. Good morning, everyone. I'd like to welcome you to ACTU's third annual conference. My name is Theodora, and I will be today's moderator. Bear with us while we wait for everybody to join. While we're waiting, I'd like everyone to know that today's conference will be recorded and later uploaded to Agencia Support's website and YouTube channel. So if you can't join us for the entire day, the recording will be available to watch later. So your microphones have been muted, and I kindly ask you to stay muted throughout the conference. If you have any questions or comments you'd like to share with us, feel free to do so. You can use the chat box located at the bottom of the bar of your screen. If you don't feel comfortable asking questions in the public chat, you are welcome to send me a private message, and I will do my best to accommodate you. There is time allocated for a question and answer towards the end of the conference. Today we have very good and interesting line of speakers, both local and international. We will be first joined by Jane Farrell, then Professor Janice Murray, then Ms. Sharon Borsch-Kembry, and then Professor Dr. Klaus Meisenberger. I can see that quite a few people have joined. I think we can begin the conference. We're going to have a short video by Malta's Minister for Inclusion and Social Wellbeing, Giulia Farrugia Portelli.
Malta's literacy rate in 2018, when last registered, stood at 94.5%, an encouraging figure, but it also shows there is still a lot to be done when compared to countries like Andorra, Norway and Latvia, with a 100% rate or a whisker away from that achievement. While we continue to tackle the small minority of people who still do not have the ability to read and write, we must also make sure literacy is accessible for all. The disability sector is actively engaged in this process, and we look forward to seeing it materialize not only statistically, but also effectively for the benefit of both the persons with disabilities and the nation as a whole. This ACTU Agencia Support initiative is testimony to the work being done, a sure way of making society and ourselves, the authorities, even more aware of the need to making literacy accessible for all, including persons with complex communication needs, CCN. The conference will go into what for some may seem as minute details, such as the provision of alternative pencils for persons who find handwriting challenging. With a target audience comprised of allied health professionals, educators, mature and young students, social care providers, and those with a declared interest in literacy, this conference will further instigate reform by the introduction of new ideas, which I am sure we will be only too happy to get to learn about from the impressive array of local but also international speakers at this conference. Here is wishing you success in your deliberations. 100% literacy rate for Malta is imperative, but not without proven accessibility.
A big thank you to our Minister, Giulia Farrugia Portelli, for that speech. We will now be joined by the CEO of Agencia Support, Mr. Oliver Scicluna, who will be starting off the conference with a welcoming address.
Good morning, everyone, and thank you for accepting our invite. First and foremost, I wish to thank the ACTU team, which have been working to reorganize this conference year after the other. And I wish to give a special welcome also to our international guest speakers, Ms. Jane Farrell, Professor Janice Murray, and Professor Klaus Meisenberger. Thanks for accepting our invite to be participating and delivering your presentations here with us. It is surely very beneficial for all of us to hear other best practices and integrate any such knowledge in the provision of our services to children and adults with different type of impairments, different disabilities. I am very pleased, honestly, to see such a big number of professionals and stakeholders, parents, etc., following us today. And this event that is now set it as a standard for us to deliver each year, as I've said before, which is also encouraging for us to see such collaboration and also good networking on what we as an agency consider as a very important and developing area of expertise. Technology, as all of you are aware, especially today, is vital for children with communication difficulties. And it is vital because communication is key for various aspects in our lives. And for children with and persons with communication difficulties, this is of utmost importance in being supported and being pushed to live and lead an independent life in the various stages of their lives. Education is one of the major rights for children, and I am sure we all agree on that, including children with disabilities. But we know at this moment in time that we have to push harder to reach the potential of certain persons with disabilities, amongst them those who have communication difficulties. So this is part of the agency strategy with our limited resources, but our strong team to push the agenda forward and try to support as much as possible persons who require our services. Our commitment and responsibility to make it accessible is very important. We thus have a commitment to provide inclusive practices that facilitates teaching for younger individuals to give them the best chance to read and write. Reading and writing is our classic way of communicating. And that is something which we are all used to, but not everybody is used to that. So that needs to be kept always in our minds. Assistive technology, as I said before, is crucial for adults and children with disabilities for different purposes such as education, employment, rights to be fully included, the importance of being socially connected with the society, and after all, the importance of being an active member in different communities on so many different levels to also facilitate independent living. Last weekend, to be precise, last Sunday, we celebrated World Children's Day, and its theme was inclusion for every child. And I always ask that question because I myself was born with a disability. Are we really putting words into action? Is every child being included? My answer is strictly no, and that is why we hold these type of conferences, so as to learn from the different experiences and practices that we share and will be sharing amongst each other. Today's event will get together a mix of local and international professionals, including academics, researchers, and therapists focusing and discussing strategies on accessible literacy. The conference will also look at how assistive technology can help support reading and writing, with the aim to enable all individuals, I say all individuals, to access written information, and also the most important thing, that one can express their own ideas. I will not take long, but I would like to thank every expertise in the area, and I would like to see the network continue to grow, so that even on an international level, as Agencia Support could continue to facilitate such events for the benefit of local professionals and their clients. Thank you and have a productive day.
Thank you very much, Oliver, for that warm welcome and talking about Agencia Support's vision. So a gentle reminder that this conference is being recorded and will be available on Agencia Support's website and YouTube channel at a later date. So if you're not able to join us for the entire conference, you are welcome to watch parts of it later. I would also like to ask you to remain muted for the entire conference and use the chat box function in order to ask any questions and make any comments you may have. I remind you once again, if anyone encounters any difficulties or may wish to send in questions privately, you are very welcome to do so. Just select my name from the chat box drop list. I would also like to ask you to fill in our evaluation form, which we will be posting in the chat box. It is really important for us to be able to hear feedback from you so that we can know in which ways we can improve and get better, and also hear from you on what topics you might want ACTU to cover in future webinars and conferences. It is important that the evaluation form needs to be filled in by the 6th of December. I think my colleague has posted it in the chat box. I will be reminding you throughout the conference to fill it in. Now, also very, very important, especially for the professionals who have joined us, if anyone would like a certificate, you will need to email us on actu.support@gov.mt by the 29th of November. So I repeat, if anyone would like a certificate, you need to email us on actu.support@gov.mt by the 29th November. We will be posting the email in the chat box as well. It is important that it's by the 29th of November because no late emails will be accepted. Okay, so today's conference will be focused on making literacy accessible for all as the title of the conference, and it will be exploring how we can support people to read and write at a very young age when they are still children, as well as how we can support adults who did not develop literacy when they were young. The conference will be supporting literacy from ages 0 to 100, so across the entire lifespan. We have our keynote speaker, who is Jane Farrell, and she will explore how we can make literacy accessible for all ages, and also make us reflect and think about how we modify literacy to teach children with disabilities. Then it will be followed by our first presentation by Professor Janice Murray, who will be exploring literacy in a very specific group, children who are minimally verbal. And this is important because from research, we know that high rates of difficulties to learn and write are prevalent in this group of children. And there are professionals who might not be aware of how to support these children as well. Then we will have Sharon Borg-Schembri, who is an occupational therapist at ACTU. Her presentation will be focused on how we can support children to access the tool of writing when they have difficulties with holding a pen and pencil and have difficulties accessing writing in a typical way. So being able to write is a part of being able to access literacy, so it is very important. And finally, we will be joined by Professor Dr. Klaus Meisenberger, who will tell us about a project that is ongoing at the Johannes Kepler University, in which websites are simplified to support people who need support access text on websites. So he provides us with an example of how we as a society can make changes to support accessibility for all. This is not just for those with a disability, it can also be for typically developing individuals as well. It is important to note that two of our speakers were unable to join us live, but have been kind enough to record their presentations, and these will be played during the conference. Just another reminder about the certificate. So if you need a certificate, please email us on actu.support@gov.mt by the 29th of November. So now I'll be introducing our keynote speaker. Our keynote speaker is Jane Farrell, who is a speech and language pathologist and special educator, who is very passionate about literacy, alternative augmentative communication, AAC, and assistive technology. She has over 30 years of experience working with people with a range of abilities and has worked both as a literacy teacher and a therapist. And she is currently working as an independent consultant, running workshops and consulting with schools around Australia. She's mainly focused on implementing AAC and comprehensive literacy for all students. And her presentation today is titled Accessible Literacy for All. And I think we can play the video now.
Hello. I assume there has been some sort of introduction. I'm really pleased to be part of your conference and I hope it goes well. I'm here this morning to talk about literacy for all that we work with, and I will get started because we only talk about this for 6 weeks. So here we go. Literacy for all. Why literacy? Literacy is actually an incredibly important life skill. It is something that impacts on our life and our quality of life in many, many different ways. I will quote the Organisation for Economic and Community Development a little bit this morning, and literacy is a continuum. We recognise that and they recognise that. And we want every individual that we work with to go as far with their literacy journey as possible. And we do that by providing evidence-based literacy practice. So literacy is a continuum, as I said. And literacy enables individuals to develop their knowledge and potential and to participate fully in their community and wider society. I was at a school a few weeks ago, and one of the senior students who has autism and who is autistic rather, and who has a moderate intellectual disability, wrote this letter to the principal letting her know that he thought the new playground that they were building was pretty much done and he needs to go out and play in it. The great thing about literacy is it lets you say anything you want to say. We know that there are a lot of positive outcomes from having good literacy skills. We know that, as I said earlier, it's a really important life skill. It's also important for personal development and personal communication. We communicate in print a lot more than we did 20 years ago. We all understand that it's important for positive educational outcomes, but there are also significant social outcomes to being literate, and for wider communities, significant economic outcomes. Being literate in today's knowledge-based world has a really big impact on our quality of life for every single one of us. I really think COVID showed that dramatically. If you were able to keep on top of the information and what was being said, I know there was a lot of misinformation out there too, but we want everybody to be able to access good information, which includes the requirements governments may have, etc. So literacy is something that has an impact on our quality of life every single day. And if you also have complex communication needs, literacy offers even more. So the goal of all AAC intervention is autonomous communication, which means being able to say what I want to say to whoever I want to say it to, whenever I want to say it, and however I choose to say it. Autonomous communication is that true freedom of expression. And literacy offers true autonomous communication. When I first started working as a speech pathologist 30 years ago, we were pretty bad at AAC. We have got a lot better, and we now have the capacity to give every individual access to a robust communication system. But being literate offers you even more than that, because you are no longer reliant on others to choose your words for you. You are no longer reliant on others to think about what you may want to say in different situations. So just 26 symbols give every individual access to thousands and thousands of words. And as I said earlier, literacy is a really important life skill, and it's a life skill that builds other life skills. It enables that autonomous communication in both face-to-face and distance communication, and it is the foundation for financial literacy, health literacy, and digital literacy. I think we all understand what financial literacy is. I wish I was a bit better at it myself at times, but financial literacy is that understanding of concepts including savings, investment, and debt. Understanding those concepts and being in control of those concepts leads to an overall sense of self-trust and well-being. Health literacy, we know we've all had that big experience with health literacy recently, as I said before, with COVID, but low health literacy is linked to a whole heap of other things, including increased visits to the emergency room, increased hospital stays, you're less likely to follow treatment, and higher mortality rates. And then, of course, digital literacy, which is so important in a wide range of ways, not just safety, but for being able to create and innovate, for teaching, learning, and self-development, and that big one for all of us, communication, collaboration, and participation. Now, before I go on, I'm just going to thank a couple of the schools that I work with for sharing their photos and data for this presentation. One is the Grove Education Centre here in Adelaide, and one is Bilimble School, which is in a place called Tamworth in regional Australia. Okay, so we know why we want to talk every individual to become as literate as they can, and now we're going to talk about how. So how do we work on literacy for all of the different individuals that we work with? One of the things is we need to understand, as the OECD said in their statement, that literacy is a continuum. It is a process that begins at birth, and it's a whole heap of skills that interact with other skills. So our listening skills impact on our literacy skills, our reading skills impact on our literacy skills, writing, and each of them impacts on the other. As I get better at listening, I get better at communicating or speaking. and so on. As I get better at reading, I get better at writing. There are no prerequisites at all for literacy development. It's just something that begins when we commence. And all of the skills develop together and they feed into and out of each other. So the four main aspects of literacy development are AAC or speaking, writing, listening and reading. And all of them also require language. And as we get better at writing, we get better at speaking. We know that as we write, we learn more about telling narratives, even before we're writing in a way that other people can understand. Even when we're scribbling as a toddler, we are learning more about narratives that help us to become a better communicator. In reading, we know that early shared reading promotes joint attention, it promotes an ability to understand 2D images, and it promotes an understanding of interaction. And so that helps us to become better at speaking. Each of these things is impacted by the other, and all of them feed into and out of language development. So, literacy is something that's crucial in AAC, and the individuals that I work with and that many of you probably work with can be anywhere along that literacy continuum from emergent to conventional. So emergent literacy learners are students who aren't yet reading and writing with comprehension, and then conventional literacy learners are students who've made that switch to reading and writing with comprehension through to reading and writing with lots of comprehension. So, as I already said, literacy relies heavily on language. We need language to understand what we read, to compose what we write. And literacy supports language development. So AAC is actually a critical part of all literacy intervention. You can't separate them. They constantly feed into and out of each other. So how do we work on literacy for all? What I do constantly is I look at the evidence base in literacy teaching, which changes much more than years ago I would have thought. It changes fairly constantly. We implement robust AAC. We integrate literacy instruction with the other curriculum areas in schools, and we use good assessment practice in literacy to help us differentiate our literacy instruction. And I just want to clarify, when I said literacy changes, it's more that we're learning more and more every day about how to get better at it. And so we learn new techniques that help us improve our instruction. As I've already said, we need to be very aware of the importance of language development. One of the things that is definitely something we need to be aware of with students who have complex communication needs and students who use AAC or many of the students that we work with many students who are at school who are still emergent literacy learners. So usually the progression is that you are emergent before school, and once you get to school, you very quickly become conventional. We work with students at varying ages at school age through to adults who are still emergent, who still need to learn the emergent literacy skills and language skills before they can progress to become conventional. And there really isn't a timeline or cutoff for learning those skills. I have worked with adults in their late 20s who've started off as emergent literacy learners, and by the time they're in their mid-30s have become conventional. There is no perfect time for learning these skills. We just need to recognise that it is a progression. There's a number of things you need to master before you can move on to the next step. At the moment in English literacy, the most common model of how we learn to read and write is called the simple view of reading. There's a war, if you like, in literacy teaching in English between the people who believe that language is more important and the people who believe that phonics or decoding is more important. In that war, people get quite passionate and excited about their point of view. In 1986, Gough and Tunma basically followed up on what a number of other people had already said, which is that both of those skills are really important. You don't learn to read if you don't know how to decode or pull apart and put back together words you don't know. And you don't learn to read if you don't have language to understand it. So they proposed it as a kind of formula that reading comprehension is a product of decoding times language comprehension. That was a really good way of thinking about it because it really recognised that both the point of views that were having a little bit of a, discussion were valid. But it didn't give us enough information about what composed each of those larger components and what we needed to teach. So we have a number of further models in English now. So here is one of them. One of the two people who wrote the original simple model was involved in this one. So under language comprehension, we have a bunch of skills, and under word recognition, we have a bunch of skills. Here's a different model by Scarborough, which is very popular, which talks about literacy being a number of strands that are the breakdown of skills in either of these models is very similar. We absolutely know that there are a bunch of things we need to learn to do to read and write with comprehension. So to get us to that point, there are a group of emergent literacy activities that every emergent literacy learner needs to engage in. We call these shared reading, working with letters and sounds, writing with adults, writing from adults, writing by me, which at this level is often scribbling and us attributing meaning to their scribbling, and a chance to independently go hands-on with books. And for our conventional students, we work on comprehension instruction. We work on words, both phonics or decoding and sight words. We work on writing independently, and we work on independent reading. So we know a bit more about how, and let's talk about who. So every student, this presentation was deliberately called Literacy for All because all means all. Every student, every literacy learner of any age can progress when we do good literacy instruction. And one of the most important points is that high expectations lead to high outcomes. We need to believe in every learner and understand that they can move forward for them to move forward. Having those high expectations are absolutely critical. So I'm now going to talk quite a bit about a school called The Grove. I live in a city in Australia called Adelaide. Adelaide is one of the smaller cities. We're about 1 million people, and The Grove is one of the schools that I've now worked with for several years. The majority of students at the school are autistic and have complex communication needs. Most of the time I've been working with The Grove, there's just been 70 students at the school. And of those 70 students, we would average about 65 who have an AAC system or who should have an AAC system. So it's a very high percentage who have complex communication needs. The school is in a relatively low socioeconomic area, and we get a lot of new migrants coming through the school. So it's a very multicultural student group. Adelaide, because it's a smaller city, we take a lot more migrants than some of the bigger cities in Australia that are kind of supposed to have reached their capacity. And so we get a lot of waves coming through from different countries. And so in the school at the moment, I think we have 15 different countries represented where the students have emigrated with their parents. So many of them come from a background where they're speaking English, a language other than English at home. And some of them, when they come to school, is the first time that they are hearing English. So we have a lot of complexities at the school. I first started with the school in 2014, so 8 years ago. At that point, literacy instruction varied from classroom to classroom, which is a very polite way of saying that each teacher made a decision about what happened in their classroom. There was no overall model in the school, and the literacy instruction varied because each teacher even got to pick what they did. There were very few students who actually had AAC systems. The systems in the school were mostly iPads with Quota Go or PEX folders. But when I first went there, most of those systems weren't being used. The PEX folders might be used at lunchtime, for example, and the Quota Go systems also got used on limited occasions or mostly lived in a tub on the side of the room. The school had 8 classrooms at the main site, and 1 class of students were being included at a local mainstream school. 2014 for me was about getting to know the students and the school and getting to know the teachers. And in 2015, we'd had a lot of discussions through 2014. I had gone into classrooms and modelled both good AAC and good literacy. And in 2015, we really started a strong journey to move towards best practice. So 2015 was the first year we assessed the students. 70% of the school were emergent, so they were not yet reading and writing with comprehension. The remaining 30% of the school were conventional. The classrooms were really just starting to get going with comprehensive literacy instruction, which is the model that I use. And it's a model that comes from the Centre for Literacy and Disability Studies in the US and is just fabulous. They were beginning to implement robust AAC. Due to the fact that quite a number of students in the school owned Quota Go on an iPad, and due to the fact that PEX doesn't have enough language for students to participate all day, the school committee made a decision to really focus on everybody learning how to use Quota Go. So iPads were bought for every teacher, teacher aides were given a low-tech version of Quota Go, and everybody modelled it as much as they could with constant setting of new targets to help people model more and more. In term 3, we did our first set of literacy assessments. We had 1 assessment for the emergent students and 1 for the conventional literacy learners. All of the conventional literacy learners were at a level we call foundation in Australia, which means the first year of school. So they were very, very early in their conventional literacy skills. Back to the OECD would say the Australian year level of grade 1, which is the following year level, is the level you need to get to have enough basic literacy skills to participate in some common daily literacy tasks. So none of our students who were conventional were actually at that level where their literacy was that useful to them in daily tasks. Many of the emergent literacy learners in the school were unable to participate in the assessment. They did not perceive themselves as learners or communicators because they hadn't been taught and perceived by others as learners and communicators. So doing any sort of formal assessment with them was incredibly, well, it just was unable to happen. And the writing in the school focused on what we know are not good practices, which was copying and tracing via handwriting. And the students who couldn't handwrite just didn't do writing. So what we did in 2015 was I gave a workshop to all the staff, a 1-day workshop on what comprehensive literacy instruction looked like. I then went in, so I was at the school for 4 weeks across the year. And during that time, I went into every classroom and modelled comprehensive literacy instruction and coached all the staff in the classrooms. We had some staff meetings through the year focusing on best practice in AAC. and particularly talking about that importance of aided language stimulation and how we need to use a system for the students to learn to use it themselves. It's the way we learn every language. We installed a standard product quota co-user across all iPads so that there was some standards when we were modelling and standard expectations. Prior to that, it was a real motley mix of users on the iPads. 2 staff were given training in completing the literacy assessments, and they did the assessments with the majority of students. I did some of them with them. Staff were really surprised that conventional literacy learners were at early foundation. Now, one of the issues with a special education setting like the Grove is that people get a very skewed view of what the conventional students are doing. They think they're much further along than they are because we don't have neurotypical students to compare them with. So that led to a lot of aha moments for people. And we had big discussions with staff about students using a range of writing tools, not just handwriting, the importance of writing for all students, and that writing is about expressing your own opinions, not copying what someone else has written. So we call that authentic student voice. In 2016, we'd had a number of students move from emergent to conventional. So we now have 64% of the school were emergent and 36% were conventional. We continued to implement both comprehensive literacy and robust AAC. We did our first ever moderated writing assessment, which I'll get back to. That was really interesting. And we set up our first ever data wall. I don't have time really to talk about data walls today. I have blogged about them in the past, but data walls are an evidence-based way of helping everybody to see that a student's progress is the responsibility of everyone in the school, not just the responsibility of the teacher while they're in their classroom. We had great discussions during that moderation about authentic writing for every student. The biggest group in that writing moderation was still even learning that they were a writer. So they hadn't had enough opportunities to write to even learn that they were a writer. All conventional literacy learners were still at foundation, so at that very beginning stage. And one of the biggest and most significant changes was now the majority of emergent literacy learners were able to participate in the assessment. That was really our most statistically significant outcome of that year and really exciting. The emergent literacy learners needed intervention in print concepts and in letters and sounds. So they didn't know how books worked and they didn't know about the alphabet. So our actions in 2016, we continued coaching, or I continued coaching, and I continued to model comprehensive literacy instruction in all classrooms. We had staff meetings focused explicitly on shared reading or comprehension instruction. So for the conventional students, comprehension instruction was the weakest area, and shared reading for the emergent students is one of the ways in which we teach print concepts. So we had a really big blitz on that. We found that people kept editing the school's Prologue Quota Go user to make it easier. I say easier in inverted commas because actually they were often making it harder by taking away vocabulary that we needed to model. So we actually password protected it to stop people changing it. We continued with whole school writing moderation, and that led to a lot of improvement in writing practice. Having your own student samples come up one after the other really helped teachers to see what they needed to do to help their class move forward. We saw a lot more writing samples with different writing tools, not just handwriting. While I'm on that topic, the OECD suggests that keyboarding is the more important life skill, that when you leave school, you are more likely to text message, use social media, fill out forms, etc. with keyboarding than you ever are with handwriting. So keyboarding is the more important transcription skill for writing. Doesn't mean we don't do handwriting, but we need to make sure that students are at least keyboarding half the week, if not more. We continued with a model where 2 staff did all the assessment, except the teachers were asked to provide the samples for the writing moderation. We continued with our discussions about the importance of writing for all students, because some students, I didn't mention this the previous year, but there were some students who didn't have writing samples, because despite all of the work we were doing, to say all means all, some teachers still were perceiving some of their kids as not able to write. I can absolutely say we can get every student writing. We just need to approach it with that high expectations mindset. We wrote what we called pedagogical agreements, which were statements that the teachers signed off on as to what best practice in each area of literacy and in AAC looks like. 2017, 52% of the school are emergent and 48% are conventional. We continued working on both comprehensive literacy and robust AAC. We added a 3rd assessment just for the early conventional students. The new assessment allowed us to determine that comprehension or writing was the greatest area of need for all of our conventional literacy learners. I call it the first year of clean assessment data. It was the first year where we really, in the writing, we had good samples for every student. The people doing the assessments really got the process under control, and our data became really reliable. We had our first conventional literacy learners move up to year 1 and to year 2, which was really exciting. They are now at the level where their literacy skills are useful to them every day in everyday life. The biggest group of students had moved. It was no longer students learning they were writers. It was now students who knew that they wrote with letters. Our actions in 2017 was to continue coaching and modelling. Each term we had a different area of literacy instruction as our focus. We developed a protocol if we needed extra things or changes in the school protocol user. There was now a committee that made those changes. We had our first communication data wall. So the 2 photos on this slide, the one on the right is the writing data wall. So the students' writing samples are all up there under the area, under the level they were assessed at. On the left-hand side is our first communication data wall. We used an assessment called the communication matrix, and we determined whether students were still receptive communicators. So that's the group on the red piece of core flipboard. The receptive communicators are the students where we are still talking with AAC for them to learn how to use it. The next group up are the students who've become expressive communicators. So they're now using AAC or speech themselves to communicate. And the yellow group are the students who are autonomous, who can say what they want to say, whenever they want to say it, to whoever they want to say it, wherever they want to say it. And then the white sheet down the bottom is a kind of a separate concept. It was the group of students who own their own highly customised AAC system. So the aim was to constantly increase that group. We had 2 staff who continued to do the majority of assessments, but the teachers really wanted to take ownership of that process. So we agreed that in 2018, each teacher would do their own assessments. We introduced that 3rd assessment, as I said, for the students at Foundation, and that assessment helped us to further clarify what we needed to do in terms of our literacy instruction and differentiating for different students' needs. In 2018, 53% of the school were emergent and 47% were conventional. We continued to work on both comprehensive literacy and robust AAC. All of our literacy assessments were completed by the teachers and they were all moderated. And this year we finally had a data wall on every area of literacy. We had a discussion about increasing the range of writing topics. When we did the moderation, we saw that a lot of classrooms were writing every single Monday about what they did on the weekend. And we have a bunch of students who did the same thing every weekend. So it wasn't really helping their writing development to write about the same thing every Monday. So we talked about that and talked about other options for Monday writing. The biggest group in the school was students who were learning to use letters and spaces. And we did our first what's called a teaching and learning sprint, where for 6 weeks you heavily focus on the skill the students need to learn. We added a fourth assessment for our early emergent students. Comprehension and writing continued to be the greatest need for our conventional literacy learners, and we now had 7 students that were between grade 1 and grade 3. Grade 3 in Australia is the level where you can participate, according to the OECD, in modern Western society in the majority of literacy tasks. So that was very exciting. Unfortunately for us, we also had a really large group of students graduate the school, 12 students. When you've only got 70, 12's a big chunk. And many of the students who'd reached grade 1 to grade 3 were in that graduating group. So we had to say goodbye to a lot of our conventional literacy learners. In 2018, we continued coaching and modelling. Each term we had a different area of literacy as the focus of the visit and the staff meeting. We developed data cards for every student. So this is our literacy data wall. So every student has a data card. It includes their writing tool and their communication modes and their results in the appropriate literacy assessment. The whole school literacy moderation we did led it to a greater understanding of the needs of the student group. Oh, we didn't have our first ever data wall. That's a mistake. Sorry about that. Ignore that line about the first ever data wall. We have a group within the school called the Literacy Professional Learning Community, and they steered that first teaching sprint with a focus on spaces, because our largest group in writing was actually the students who were needing to learn that we write with letters and spaces. The teachers did their own assessments. We introduced daily record forms for both writing and shared reading. We really wanted to have a way to track how the writing practice and shared reading practice was going every day. And things like if a sentence was constructed for a student to write about, who had constructed that sentence? Was it the student independently, or had the adult scaffolded or co-constructed? So we wanted information on that to see where every student needed to move to. We did our first ever day where I just worked with the education assistants, the teacher aides, and I did a whole day with them on writing to help them understand more about where we were going with writing and what we were doing, because they are an important part of our classrooms. In 2019, we dropped off a bit due to the students that left. So we're down to 59% of the school are emergent. And of course, up to 59%. Of course, the majority of students who came in were 5-year-olds, and they were all emergent. So that increased our emergent group. We continued to work on comprehensive literacy and robust AAC. Writing, we set writing as a school improvement focus, so it was something we had to keep really strong data on to be reported to the Education Authority. The biggest group in writing was now learning to write phonetically and with sight words, which is fabulous. Having moved on from our biggest group being students who even had to learn that they were writers, to move to a group that are starting to write phonetically and using sight words was just a huge celebration. A number of students moved from having comprehension as their areas of greatest need to having phonemic awareness as their area of greatest need, which showed that all the fabulous work we've been doing in AAC and comprehension instruction had paid off. And now what students needed more of was activities to help them hear sounds in words and to figure out how to decode and recode words. As I said, we had that large group of new students who were all emergent. We now only had 6 conventional literacy learners from grade 1 to grade 3. So the rest of the conventional literacy learners are at that foundation level I mentioned earlier. So still wanting them to move up to that magical grade 1 level, but we've only got 6 students in the school at that grade 1 to grade 3 level. In Australia, we had a new goal setting model come out that we had to move to. Which means that every student now has 1 reading goal, 1 writing goal, and one communication goal. That's not really relevant to you, but yeah, it did make a difference to our instruction, because before that time there was no specification about what a student's goals had to be. So they could have been all goals in self-care or something like that. So what we did in 2019 was we continued coaching and modelling. We reviewed our phonemic awareness instruction to make sure we were doing the best that we could to help those students where it was their area of greatest need. For our emergent kids, we really ensured they participated in onset rhyme activities to improve their phonemic awareness. We have a couple of programs in English called Systematic Sequential Phonics and Making Words, which the Centre for Literacy and Disability Studies in America highly recommends for students with complex communication needs. They're a learn by doing phonics approach, and so they don't have as much talking before you do activities, which has been a problem with some of the phonics programs we've come across. When you give a 20-minute lecture about phonics before the students do anything, for a lot of our students with complex communication needs and intellectual disabilities, we just lose them. It's really hard for them to process that amount of language. I did a second professional development day just for the education assistants, which had a focus on shared reading. The Communication and Professional Learning Committee ran a word of the week or a pathway of the week through the whole year. We started having more students using POD at that stage, so that's where pathway of the week came from. The Grove won an award from Isaac Australia for their outstanding use of AAC in the school. And all staff, both teachers and education assistants, now have an iPad for modelling Prolo Quota Go. And in classrooms where students were using POD, the staff also had POD books to model with. In 2020, 59% of the school were emergent, 41% were conventional. We continued working on both comprehensive literacy and robust AAC. Our biggest group in writing were learning to write complete sentences. Yay! What we found was that for a lot of students in this group, they were writing sentences that were intelligible, but they were missing little words like of and the and to. And that was partly down to the way that we'd been modelling keywords in AAC. So we had a real blitz in the school of modelling and talking about little words. We even had Little Word of the Week because we needed to explicitly teach them to the students. We had 9 conventional literacy learners who were from grade 1 to grade 4. The rest of the conventional students were at foundation. Strong improvement in phonemic awareness due to all the great work from everybody. And our emergent literacy learners went back to needing intervention in print concepts and letters and sounds. So in 2020, we continued the coaching and modelling. We did writing mini lessons. So this is where a teacher models before the students write a mini lesson, and every mini lesson focused on one complete sentence for that large group of students where they needed to learn that skill. We started talking in our writing moderation. We were using a tool for writing moderation that had a single score for students writing a complete sentence. And that was a bit frustrating to teachers because one student's complete sentence might be, I like dogs, and another student's complete sentence might be, dogs are animals that are great companions and I wish I had one. And so the teachers felt, very rightly, that it was unfair to score both students at the same level. So we started having a big discussion about different sentences. The Communication Professional Learning team developed a program for Little Word of the Week. We implemented close assessment tasks to more accurately assess the reading comprehension level of all conventional students. One of the things I will say is I've learned in the last 10 years that I've been doing coaching with schools on implementing good AAC and good literacy is you can't hit people with everything all at once. And by this, I mean the staff. We need to accept that staff, absolutely, all teachers are lifelong learners, all of us are lifelong learners, and we need to give people the capacity to slowly move and grow. So we're still introducing new parts of the program, even though this is 6 years later. Every student in the school was assigned a reading level. All books in the school library were levelled to assist students to find a book at their level. We now have a small group of pod users in the school, so we had whole staff pod training, and teacher meetings with the principal focused on a single student, their data and their goals. And that thing called COVID happened. I probably don't want to tell you this, but where I live in Adelaide, we had very little COVID. We actually shut our borders even to the rest of Australia, and we had very few cases of COVID overall until this year when we opened our borders again. So this year has actually been the hardest year for us with COVID. The previous 2 years, our problems were more about the fact that we were really closed off, which wasn't very nice. 2021, 52% of the school are emergent and 48% are conventional. We continued working on both comprehensive literacy and robust AAC. We recognised that an awareness of the understanding of print concepts, knowing what direction print goes in, that we read and write from left to right, that we come down as we read a page, etc., was the biggest area that was holding our emergent students back from moving up to conventional, and then was kind of holding our early conventional students back. So we had set a 3-year target to really improve in that area. A number of emergent students consolidated their alphabet knowledge and plateaued in their print concepts. Significant improvement in phonemic awareness actually led to comprehension becoming the area of greatest need for our conventional literacy learners again. So we were able to move them up in one area, and then another area comes to the form as the one we really need to focus on in instruction. And that's just the cycle of literacy. Majority of students who were writing partial sentences had progressed to writing one complete sentence. Yay! We had an increase in phonetic spelling in student writing, which was definitely due to all the work we've now been doing in phonemic awareness. And we had 15 conventional literacy learners from grade 1 to grade 3. Unfortunately for us, the government decision meant that the classroom at the mainstream school finished. They were all in that group of 15 conventional literacy learners. So again, we lost a chunk of conventional literacy learners. We also every year have students graduate, and of course the students at the high end of the school or the top end of the school in terms of age are more likely to be in that conventional group. So in 2021, we continued coaching and modelling comprehensive literacy instruction. We implemented new ways of doing print concepts and print referencing. We reviewed our good practice in comprehension instruction. We created comprehension packs for the teachers to use. We did writing mini lessons focusing on writing more than one good sentence, of course. We had ongoing discussions during our writing moderation about not all sentences are equal. And as a result, I took a new tool to the writing moderation where I proposed a bigger scale with more focus on different sentence types. And at the end of our writing moderation, we actually tried using our new scale and started turning that into a tool that we could use and that other schools could use. And COVID continued. 2022, 57% of the school were emergent, 43% were conventional. We continued working on both comprehensive literacy and robust AAC. School's now only 8 classrooms because we lost that classroom at the local mainstream school. We saw a strong improvement in print concepts, really strong, one of the strongest improvements we'd seen in any area. So that change we made in our print referencing instruction made a huge difference. We had 12 conventional students from grade 1 to grade 2. The rest of the conventional students were at foundation. We continued with our improvement in phonemic awareness in the early conventional literacy learners. We saw an improvement in comprehension, which was great. Comprehension still was the area of greatest need, and the new writing continuum had moved closer to being official, and we used it right from the beginning of the writing moderation this year. Continue with coaching and modelling this year. The year is still in progress, of course, so I've only been there 3 times this year. I should say our years match up with our calendar years. So we start school in February towards the end of summer, and we finish school in December at the beginning of summer. So right now here it's spring, and it's a beautiful spring day outside. We greatly improved print referencing by staff, which was great. And so we saw that corresponding increase in print concepts in the emergent students. We improved comprehension for our early conventional literacy learners. Unfortunately, our later conventional literacy learners, we only had an improvement in listening comprehension. So that's something we need to look at for next year. We need to focus on reading comprehension, therefore, in our training and classroom practice. We used the new writing tool, which is called the Writing with All Tools Continuum, and it's now available on my blog. We did the writing moderation, highlighted our need for mini lessons with conventional writers. For a lot of our students, the thing that was stopping them from moving up to another level was their lack of punctuation and learning to write more complex sentences. I will be doing the first observations around self-selected reading ever next term. So even though we've been doing that for the last 8 years, we've never had that being a focus of one of my visits. And we will also be doing some professional development on co-construction and helping students to build their capacity to tell narratives. In terms of our conventional students, we've now graduated over 30 students who left the school at grade 1 or above. This is the progress in numbers of conventional students. So you can see those couple of dips where we had a big group of conventional students leave. But overall, we're on that upwards trend of more and more students becoming conventional and, of course, at that grade 1 level and above. So I've defined what that means in terms of OECD proficiency level for that more international definition. And so this will help them participate much more fully in their community and wider society. Last thing I'm going to get to is what are the outcomes for every student. So clearly we have those outcomes for our conventional students who've achieved grade 1 and above, but of course we were also graduating students who haven't got to that level. What we do have is we have outcomes in every aspect of literacy. Excuse me, I'm just going to have a drink. So we have students improving in all of these 4 areas of literacy and, of course, in language. In terms of reading, our emergent literacy learners show increased skills every year in their print concepts, letter knowledge, and phonemic awareness. Our conventional literacy learners have increased their reading comprehension most years. As I said, that wasn't the case this year, so that's something we now need to really look at. The assessment cycle we do helps us to determine those trends and also to determine where the group needs extra support and also where individual students need extra support. In terms of AAC and speaking, as I said earlier, there are lots of aspects of literacy that feed into AAC and speaking. One of the things we know is that books use a much more diverse range of words than speech. So vocabulary growth usually follows lots of book reading. The interactions we have around books encourage narrative skills and turn taking. And stories that rhyme are really helpful for teaching speech and language skills and can help kids to discover a love of language. In terms of listening, participating in those shared reading helps all kids to build listening skills. And for conventional students, regular participation in comprehensive literacy instruction also improves their literacy comprehension, listening comprehension. In writing, emergent writing helps students build many skills, including their narratives. For students with complex communication needs, writing development is incredibly important. Even if you don't get to a really high level with writing independent sentences, Many students are now able to tell us the beginning letter of a word that isn't in their communication system, which has been a great breakthrough. Others can use a combination of symbols and writing to get their message across. And of course, they get to participate in social interactions through writing on social media, etc. So, for every individual, literacy is a crucial life skill. For all students, participation in comprehensive literacy instruction provides gains in language that lead to greater communication skills, as well as literacy skills. And so we want literacy for all. Thank you for joining me on this journey. I'm sorry it had to be such a short one. I hope your conference goes really well. I hope this presentation has given you food for thought, and I hope I'll see you again sometime in the future. Thank you.
Thank you, Jane. Jane was kind enough to provide us with a recording of her presentation as she was unable to join us live. It was a very interesting presentation, and it was great to learn about the different kinds of literacies out there, such as financial literacy, health literacy, digital literacy. It's also super interesting to see how the children have improved over the years, and shows us the importance of how consistent input and the whole school planning approach is important for effective change. It also shows us the importance of measuring data to be able to obtain quantifiable and qualitative results over time. Unfortunately, Jane is not able to join us for a question and answer session. However, if you do have any questions, you are welcome to send them in the chat box, and myself and my ACTU colleagues will try our best to answer them. If not, the questions can be forwarded to Jane. Our next speaker is Professor Janice Murray. She is the Professor of Communication Disability at the Manchester Metropolitan University in the United Kingdom. And she is currently the chair of the Augmentative and Alternative Communication Committee for the International Association of Communication Sciences and Disorders. Very long. She has done a lot of research in the field of AAC, and her research has focused on clinical decision-making, AAC assessment, language acquisition using aided communication and AAC, as well as literacy. Today, she will be presenting a presentation entitled Perspectives of Young People Who Use AAC and Their Family Members on Their Literacy Learning. Thank you.
Thank you, Theodora, for that lovely introduction. I shall just do the technical part first and share my screen, hopefully. There we go, and I'll just put it onto slideshow. Is all okay there, Theodora? Can you see my?
Yes, all good, thank you.
That's excellent, thank you very much. Good morning, everyone, and thank you very much to the organisers of this day for the invitation, and I'm delighted to be here and somewhat intimidated to follow the wonderful Jane Farrell, whom I have had the opportunity to spend time with over the years. So fantastic introduction there, and some of what I will present will hopefully resonate with elements of Jane's presentation. So before moving into the presentation, I'm here on behalf of a team of people who are on this slide. This was a collaborative effort between colleagues at Manchester Met and colleagues at AT Therapy, and you will hear more about that as we move through. And clearly, the very important people I'll be introducing you to shortly are the young people who used AAC and their family members. And the key element of this presentation is going to give you insight into their thoughts about literacy and what literacy meant to them and continues to mean to them. So a little bit of background to the project. It was a project that we did just before COVID turned our world upside down. So this was June 2019, and we had 4 young people who participated, and they came along to the university for a number of days. They came along, some of them with their parents. They were all known to our colleagues at AT Therapy. And I will describe those young people in a little bit more detail shortly. But our key aim for this exploratory project, we'd never delivered anything like this before. I guess we were sort of conceptualizing it as maybe the beginnings of an AEC and literacy summer school. But a key focus of this was to explore their literacy, and in particular their phonological awareness skills. So as Jane has already alluded to, a big focus was around that decoding element of literacy for these young people, and how those skills could be assessed in young people with severe physical and speech impairments. And we wanted to, I guess, baseline levels of ability for them that we could then take forward over the following year in terms of some literacy and AEC intervention support. But the objective for today is not so much to go through the assessments that we did. I will tell you a little bit more about those, but what we are going to do is then get the other side of that. So baselining them in terms of identifying what literacy skills they had was just one aspect. It was really important for us to get a sense of what they thought about what they'd already achieved and what they might achieve in future. And that's what we'll focus on. So, a little bit more about these young people. They were all in full-time education, but in a variety of settings. So that included special educational school settings and mainstream schools and specialist college settings, as you'll find out. We used a number of language assessments as part of this baselining, gathering information about them, and much of this was conducted prior to the days that the young people spent with us in the university. This included this included the scales Okay, can you now hear me, I hope? So
Yes, I can hear you.
Thank you. We also had the intention of completing something called the Assessment of Phonological Awareness and Reading, the APAR. And this was the key assessment probe that we were going to conduct with the young people when they did join us at the university. And this was concluded with interviews with the young people and their family members in terms of their literacy experiences. And we'd agreed that at the end of all of this information collection, we would write some recommendation reports collectively, and we would then offer them to share with the multidisciplinary team, which would include educational staff, in terms of what might be helpful to move these young people's literacy abilities further on. Okay, so just a little reminder of what we're thinking of when we're talking about augmentative alternative communication. So we would see augmentative as supporting and alternative as replacing attempts at spoken communication. And there may be particular reasons for trying to replace the way in which certain communication is being offered. One of the key things that we were exploring with these young people was their phonological awareness skills. So that ability to identify and manipulate sounds in spoken language and how that translates into manipulating the written word. And it's a cognitive skill, which obviously becomes internalized over time. So we did have a few research questions, but the ones for today were these. So what were the literacy learning experiences of the young people who used AAC as reported by them and by their family? And how did these literacy learning experiences contribute to literacy attainment as seen by them? So how did they think that they were doing in terms of their literacy abilities? We decided to take a phenomenological approach, an exploratory approach, where we were trying to get some in-depth insights into their views on their literacy, but it was obviously delivered through that lens of being AAC users, which is very different experience of becoming literate than a typical learner might be. We also used some adapted interview procedures to support the young people to explain how they viewed their literacy, and I'll describe those momentarily. And then, following the phenomenological theme through, we carried out a thematic analysis, which again I will show you shortly. And obviously that is one area, phenomenology is one area of trying to explore something in depth and in detail, and potentially going in without some preconceived perspectives on what we might hear and what we might learn. So here are the young people. They were aged between 11 and 15, and obviously it was purposive sampling. We really had two groups, although we only had 4 young people. So not their real names, but group 1 were Jenny and Noel. And these were 2 AAC users who predominantly use symbol-based vocabularies, were beginning to read and spell. However, they were struggling to progress with their current literacy intervention, and people felt they really weren't terribly interested or engaged in literacy activities or literacy lessons. And Mike and Mandy were then described as 2 highly competent AAC users who used text-based vocabulary packages, were conventional spellers, and could read connected text, but were keen to develop their literacy skills further. And these 2 young people were the older of the 2 as well, as you'll see again in a moment. In terms of the family members, we asked the young people to nominate a family member to be interviewed, and these were the people that consented. So we had 4 parents, 1 of whom was a father and the other 3 were mothers. And this gives you some insight into the age range of the parents and their own educational level, which we were interested to hear about because we wondered if that might impact on their perceptions of the importance of literacy for their young people. So, as I've alluded to, there are things that I'm not really going to present today, and there are things I'm going to spend more time with. So here is a summary on the left-hand side of the things that we did prior to the day, which included the test of reception of grammar, the British Picture Vocabulary Scale, and then these scales, which I believe I do have a slide. So you're probably familiar with these particular rating scales, all developed primarily for medics to use to give you a very kind of blunt description of physical ability, speech ability, and communication ability. And then, as I said, here is the link to this freely downloadable assessment if this is one that you're not familiar with. It has been around for a long number of years and it emanates from Australia. So do go look it up if it's of interest to you. So as I've said, today what we're going to look at is the rating procedure that we used and how we approached the structured interviewing. So we delivered this using, as I've said, an adapted interview procedure. So questions were asked and responses were given via a 3-point rating scale. So similar to a Likert scale or a Talking Maths scale. And the participants each indicated their responses in whichever way they could. So that might have been eye gaze or hand pointing. And as I said, we used the talking mats particularly to support how we might get a sense of what was important to the young people. We also had open questions with very sufficient pause times where each young person had the opportunity to supplement their responses with their own commentary. And we also gave them time to come back to us at a later point to embellish any of those responses should they wanted to. So here is just an example of something we use to help in terms of response to our questions or a questionnaire. So we used a traffic light system with all of the participants to gain their perceptions of their thoughts, of their aspects of literacy. So in other words, do you spend enough time learning to read, spell and write? They had a chance to say no, sort of, we think we do spend enough time, or yes, we definitely do. So kind of from no, we don't, definitely, we're not happy with how much time we spend there, to we're very happy with how much time we spend on a particular activity related to literacy. And here is just an example of how a talking mat panned out for one young person, where we were talking about what did you think helped you a little, what do you think helped you a lot in terms of supporting you to either be interested in literacy or learn new literacy skills. So things that helped a little, one example I'll pick from here was group work on the left-hand side of the picture. One young person felt on the right-hand side of the picture that phonics games helped them a lot. So there were various opinions, and obviously we prepped a number of resources ahead of the interviews to help the young people indicate what they wanted to. Obviously, if they had the vocabulary that they wanted to use on their AEC device, that is also how they responded. So this was really just a facilitation tool rather than the way that they had to respond in totality. So what did we do that might have been the same or different for the family members? Again, we did individual interviews and we offered the same structured rating scale. And we also offered open questions to explore their perceptions of their young person's literacy. So what did we do in terms of analysis? Well, we obviously did verbatim transcription where that was possible. The talking mats were photographed as an alternative type of transcription, and both were used in terms of the actual analysis. The rating scale responses were retained and translated into a descriptive Likert scale, again using the traffic light system. I'm going to show you that in a moment. And we felt this traffic light system was very visual and very accessible. So we were using that across the analysis, but also across the reporting process. So what did we do with the data? We used an inductive semantic or a descriptive approach to analysis of interview and talking mat data. And that led to an initial coding process suggesting that no literacy experiences were recorded as not helpful. I think that's a very unhelpfully written phrase there. So in other words, no one identified anything that they didn't think had some value in terms of helping their literacy to develop. We carried on with the coding and generated a number of themes where we were describing what or who had supported literacy development, and also maybe what was missing from their experiences, and therefore what could be offered in terms of some opportunity for greater enjoyment of literacy skill or greater development of literacy. So here is a summary of the types of experience that the individuals rated. I'll just try and get that out of my screen because I'm assuming it's also on your screen. There we go. So just to kind of orientate you here, there's a long list, and we have that traffic light system of what they thought helped them a lot, what helped them a little, and actually what they felt they had no experience of, which is the red column. So let's just take a moment or two to pick out some of the things that are listed here. So all of them felt that the use of written text and technology, which I think when Jane was talking about the use of keyboard rather than writing by hand, is obviously going to be very important to these young people with physical disability, physical challenges. So they felt that technology in particular helped a lot, or one young person was on the fence and said it potentially helped a little. One of the key ones, halfway down there, story writing, which also obviously relates to storytelling. So the conversion of that storytelling, that story creation into story writing was perceived as a particularly important skill to get opportunity. And also in intensive direct support. What that support was, we haven't unpicked here, but that will come along shortly. So interesting to see the way in which the young people were seeing the activities that they were exposed to and how they rated them. Right down at the bottom there, not undertaken or feeling that they've no real experience of was access to reading material in the community. Now, what that might mean is, for example, going out for a meal with families and the menu being read to them rather than them being given the menu to read themselves and make a decision about. So something really practical like that was a very different experience for these 4 young people. So moving on, we looked at the key themes that parents identified as what or who supported literacy development and what were the gaps, what would offer opportunities to develop. So this was tapping both research questions 1 and 2. And the key themes that we were able to summarise from what they shared was identifying motivating literacy activities and maximising the usefulness of technology. So what did that look like when we drilled down a little further? So thinking about motivating literacy experiences, so here are a couple of quotes. You just need to sort of get her on like a fish on a hook, so to speak, pique her interest, make it hers. She's very competitive. I think that's one of the things that really spurs her on. One of the things we did across the 4 days that we had the young people was we had a competition going on between the boys and the girls, it has to be said, and we were doing some pretty dry assessment. So actually they were getting tokens for whether they got a KFC or a McDonald's at the end of the activity. And that seemed to be highly motivating in terms of them really dealing with the less motivating assessment tasks that we were making them do at certain points across the days. So one other motivating factor was making things more game-like for the individuals. If he's interested in something, he'll work at it. If he's not, he's just going to turn his head away. So that gave us insights into what sorts of things, like this example here, a scavenger hunt, might actually switch one of the young people on to actually working on literacy without perhaps noticing that's what was happening. So maximising technology broke down into 3 particular things. So for some of the young people, access to eye gaze was critical, and actually constructing some literacy opportunities, again, around games, around silly storytelling, creating nonsense poems, telling jokes, constructing jokes, those sorts of things being created around the software that was available through the eye gaze system. And actually being open to any kind of technology, so whether it's actually their communication aid, their phone technology, their other gaming technology that they may have had at home, and actually trying to make best use of those in terms of the literacy incidentals that may be part and parcel of what was available. The other thing that came up here was the dilemma of access to predictive text and independent spelling opportunities, and that sometimes there can be a real tension there between actually, if we're always using prediction, are we going to become independent spellers? Alternatively, can predictive text act as a personal tutor in terms of enabling greater development there? And I think the jury's out on what might be best. And I think it comes down to individuals and knowing what might be best for them at that point in time. So here are some quotes related to some of those things. So, and I know they do cooking and science and things, but I think for Noel, he's still got his device, so that's his AAC device on, so he's still learning and he's still speaking through that, and he's still being corrected through that. So that's the influence of literacy being the key driver in terms of communication, as well as perhaps literacy directed lessons. And here are the examples related to some of those tensions about prediction. So she's quite good at experimenting. It does help that she's got predictive text, and she tends, I'd say probably 99% of the time with predictive text, she gets it correct. So that was really supporting that young person's spelling. However, when it's taken away, she starts to lag behind. So there's something important there about our perceptions of ability. And if we take some of those props away, how our perceptions might change. And that's a really important thing to be aware of in terms of mixing it up and not relying on one particular system in its entirety. And I guess the second quote there sort of sums up the perceptions that family members felt we really needed to build both factors in there and not rely on one approach. Okay, so the technology. So one participant reported that using social media had been where their young person had gained the most literacy skills. So there's a lot of talk about, protecting individuals in terms of access to social media, but here's a discussion to be had around how it can actually support certainly teenagers in terms of their interest in engaging in literacy-led experiences. And here's where the reading of menus came into play, and actually putting them in the driving seat of trying to make sense of the menu and ordering clothes online, which obviously has become much more of a pastime for most of us over the most recent years. So some really mainstream activities to support with their literacy development. Okay, moving on and thinking more about the second research question. And here we were getting the individuals to rate their own different aspects of reading, writing, and spelling. So the first three columns here are the young people's ratings of their reading, writing, and spelling skills. And the other three columns are their parents' ratings of the same skills. And again, we've used the traffic light setup here to give you a sense of whether they felt they were independent, whether they felt their abilities were developing, or whether they really were emerging and perhaps needed most work. So it's interesting to see where the young people and their family members are in agreement or are not in agreement. So there we have Mike, who's in complete agreement with their parent, whereas Mandy seems to be seeing her skills as slightly less developed than her parents, who see her as more independently coping in terms of literacy. Mandy, it has to be said, was the young person who used a lot of social media and ordering of clothes online. So those very mainstream activities may have been influencing different perceptions there. and we can talk about that later. And then we move into the two young people who, at the beginning, I described as not being as engaged with literacy and as perhaps being much more at that emerging stage. And we've got quite a range of responses here. So Jenny feeling that she's more ahead on her skills than her parents, and Noel actually perhaps in some instances there's greater agreement in terms of where he's at in terms of his development across those three areas of reading, writing and spelling. So we can come back to that later if that's of interest, but let's move on to then think of how they're thinking about the different types of literacy. So is literacy important? Do you enjoy literacy? Are you giving yourself enough time to work on literacy? So unlike the previous one, what we've done here is we've got the column, first column is the young person's rating of how important literacy is. The next column, the parents' rating of how important it is for their young person. Then we move on to the next one of enjoyment, and it's the young person first, followed by the parents' sense of whether they think their young person enjoys it. And then we move on to, are you spending enough time working on literacy? First column being the young person, the second being their parents' view of whether they are or not. So again, a bit of variation, and there's more variation here for Mike compared to the previous table. So in terms of whether it's important or not, Mike thinks it's okay. He's probably got enough literacy to get by, whereas his parent thinks actually this is the means of getting by. He does quite like it, but his parent's not sure that he does. He thinks he's spending enough time on it, and his parent doesn't think he is. So a bit of insight into expectations and maybe a route into thinking about the types of literacy experiences that might help Mike change perceptions, change views, if that's what's actually needed or necessary. Clearly, all of these ratings are very subjective ratings, and we need to bear that one in mind. But again, if we look at Mandy, there's a little bit of variation, but they're probably much more in agreement in terms of how Mandy views herself and how her parent does. And there seems to be complete agreement in terms of where Jenny is at between her insights and her parents' insights. And not bad for Noel either. There seems to be, quite a bit of agreement there. Time is something that maybe Noel's parents thinks is needed a little bit more time. And Noel particularly struggled to be engaged in traditional literacy activities that had been reported to us before we started. So where did that take us? So just kind of summing this up, and then I'm going to tell you a little bit about what happened following the few days that we had with the young people, and give you some examples of that, and then that's me wrapping up. So I guess some of the implications some of the initial implications that we drew from this initial analysis was that the timing of literacy education, the curriculum delivery demands, non-school-based literacy experiences seem to be as important for these young people as the kind of traditional classroom curriculum demands. And actually these young people who were all wheelchair users, all communication aid users, in terms of their non-school-based activities, and therefore literacy activities, were potentially quite different to your typical learner. So there's maybe something there for us to unpick more about how those are scaffolded and how those are experienced. So that does then lead on to opportunities that fit the child or the young person's speed of task completion, their knowledge of the world, and their experiences of the world may be unique and therefore different, and therefore there are different types of challenges in terms of how we need to scaffold literacy and curriculum access for them. Expectations and aspirations. Now, this is something Jane alluded to. So low ratings of enjoyment across the board, yet literacy attainment highly valued. So how do we square that circle in terms of increasing enjoyment and increasing, therefore, engagement? And I guess this stopping and asking their thoughts really showed us the importance of stakeholder perceptions, because if we really have a sense of what they think about literacy, then it's possibly going to help us develop more appropriate literacy experiences and hopefully aid their buy-in, be much more motivating and much more interesting to that young person. So to give you an example of what went forward for one young person, over the following 12 months, all of them had lots of support, and that was provided by colleagues from AT Therapy. These were individualised learning activities. A sense of increasing enjoyment and engagement was reported, and there was changing perceptions of both educators and family members around all young people's interest and abilities with literacy. So, as we promised, here's an example of what we did at the end of our few days with them. This is an extract from one of the reports that we wrote on one young person, and this was presented to the multidisciplinary team. So we highlighted the strengths, good engagement, enjoyed the competitive element. So competition in literacy was really important. Good reading skills for shorter words and easier spellings. So maybe we're needing to target harder words, longer words. Had a nighttime or a bedtime reading routine. But then looking at the difficulties for this young person, there was a real sense of impulsivity and how that might affect motivation. So not taking a sufficient time to think about what the response should be when you have a range of options, getting it wrong, and then therefore becoming demotivated. So exploring how to reduce impulsivity and give the young person a way of really appraising the things on offer for that literacy activity, get it right, be more motivated, building positive on positive. So there's just one example. And the colleague who worked with this young person is Francesca Sefton from AT Therapy. So I'm thanking her for her slides here. So a couple more slides from her, and then we will round up. So here is just some examples of the activities that were done to focus on developing Noel's participation in reading. So this was to help continue with something that was good, this nighttime reading activity, but also developing that sense of narrative and also developing his vocabulary. So this was trying to target increasing the complexity of the words that he could spell. You can see some of the books that he particularly liked. Now, given his actual chronological age, you might think Pig and the Talking Pooh might be at a slightly earlier age developmentally, which brings in that discussion around those kind of social and emotional developmental levels and how that fits with texts that might be available at a particular curriculum stage, and actually texts that might be available at an earlier curriculum stage. So there were some really interesting things that were explored here, and he became highly motivated to use those. So just another snapshot, the participant could engage in functional literacy activities such as drawing up the order for the takeaway, or writing slightly rude poems or raps. This lad became a very good rapper, and obviously please be aware you are getting access to his actual name there. You are also getting a sense of what he thought of certain football teams in Manchester. So we'll move on from that because that could start a dreadful debate. So, some final thoughts for you. This was a very small study. This was really exploratory, but we saw some real practical change in terms of what was done, what was scaffolded, what was delivered. But I think what we all got from this was the real value of seeking the opinions of the young people and putting them in the driving seat. Talking mats, I'm sure you're all very familiar with. It was a really helpful tool. There is something still to unpick between this disconnect of the importance these young people place on literacy and their reported enjoyment. So it's almost like the golden egg that they know that they should be trying to capture, but maybe they just don't quite know how to. And that's perhaps where our input becomes quite important. So given the central importance of literacy acquisition is going to have for these young people, finding ways to engage them is going to be probably the most important aspect of what we try to do. And advocating for access to appropriate technology and intensive one-to-one support. The fact that AT therapy colleagues were able to follow up in an intensive way allowed us to almost do a little bit of longitudinal evaluation and actually see real change. And that kind of intensive support is not necessarily available in all contexts. So we see this as obviously adding to at least the discussion that we can have about future evidence base in terms of supporting what will make a difference for the young people. And I was given this proverb when I visited Africa, and I think it's a really thought-provoking one that I want to leave you with. Until the lion learns to write, every story will glorify the hunter. So we would say that the lion is a glorious beast, but actually who do we prize? We often prize the hunter who's managed to capture the lion. So I'll leave you pondering what that might mean in terms of your aspirations for your young people. And my very last slide is a huge thank you to the young people and their families, the support of Manchester Met, who funded what we were able to do, and my colleagues here from different organisations. It very much was a team effort. So I shall stop sharing my screen and I will then be able to see you all, and thank you very much for listening.
Thank you so much, Professor Janice. That was great, and I really like that quote that you shared with us. Through my clinical work, I have found that the Talking Maths resource is not something that many are actually aware of in Malta, but it is such a great tool, especially for facilitation. So thank you for showing us that example. Also, it was great that you included the opinions and the perspectives of the AAC users and the young individuals as well. I think sometimes, or many times, they're overlooked as to what they think, and it's usually just the parents that we look at. We will be doing a question and answer session with Professor Janice now. So if anybody has any questions, please drop them in the chat box. We do have a question, which was, who was involved in the multidisciplinary team? And was it just the speech therapist who provides the child with therapy, or was there a wider group?
Thank you, brilliant question. The multidisciplinary team varied according to the schooling location of the young people. So in the specialist school context, that included obviously education staff, which were class teachers, teaching assistants. It also included health staff like school nurse and occupational therapy, physiotherapy colleagues. In the mainstream setting, it really was primarily educational staff. So it did vary. The speech and language therapists were the key instigators of the activities that were followed on with each young person, but they were carried out by family members, the speech and language therapist, and also usually teaching assistants in the classroom setting for the individual. So they were activities, some of which were done in a class setting, and others were very much at a home setting or a leisure setting. And the speech and language therapist met with that young person in all of those locations. One other thing just to say, one of the young people, one of the oldest lads, was actually a mentor to one of the younger people. And they actually worked together over the following year on different activities as well. And they developed them themselves. We had nothing to do with that. So that was a wonderful, unexpected development from setting up ongoing input for the young person.
Thank you for that. That was great. And it's great to hear that it influenced other students to help each other out as well. I think it's something we would all wish we could achieve. I don't know if there's any more questions. I haven't had anything pop up in my chat yet.
That's perfectly fine. If people have others at a later point, I'm very happy to receive emails and respond directly. I should say that the part I didn't report on today has been written up in the Communication Matters journal. So if people want to access the what did we do, then that is available elsewhere as well. But thank you.
Thank you very much for joining us. We will now be taking a short break till 11:30, so enough time to stretch your legs and get some coffee. And then we will be joined by 2 other speakers. So thank you very much. Hi, everyone. Thank you for joining us again. So before introducing our next speaker, I would like to remind anyone who needs a certificate of attendance, please send us an email on actu.support@gov.mt by the 29th of November. I would also like to remind you to fill in our evaluation form. Any feedback would be great to receive. And remember, any questions you may have can be placed in the chat box below. So our next speaker is Miss Sharon Borch-Kembry. Sharon is a senior assistive technology practitioner and an occupational therapist with the ACTU team. She has more than 17 years of experience as an OT in Malta, and her areas of interest and publications include the use of assistive technology and its role in facilitating access to literacy and participation in inclusive education. Sharon has taken part and presented in various national and international conferences and associations, and she is an active member of the ESPD Person-Centered Technology Forum. Her presentation today is entitled Alternative Pencils, Why and When to Use Them.
Good morning, everybody, and I'm happy to be here sharing with you this information about alternative pencils, why and when to use them. In this introduction, we will be looking at what we mean by alternative pencils. We'll discuss what is writing and what is not. We look at writing skills and the importance of writing, why we should consider the use of alternative pencils, discuss the development of writing, who benefits from alternative pencils. We'll have a look at examples of alternative pencils, and we will discuss some examples. What are alternative pencils? An alternative pencil is any tool that gives the individual access to a full alphabet. It was developed at the Center for Literacy and Disability Studies at the University of North Carolina for those individuals who cannot access writing using traditional methods. And Henser wrote about it in 2006 and also in 2009. It also provides efficiency as it enables the individual to focus on the process of writing with the least effort. So we're looking at those pencils that will help a learner to be able to write without the need to have effort with his motor skills. What is writing? It is a complex process that requires the integration of various skills. Writing is a means of communication. It helps us to demonstrate what we learned, give information, and document our experiences and our stories. Writing is beyond the strict focus of letter formation and mechanics of writing. It involves active and independent attempts, construction of print, and it involves mental engagement. So what is not writing? Copying without a purpose, so just copying text, is a fine motor task, focuses on letter formation. Tracing, again, this is a fine motor task and does not give opportunities to learners to generate language. Using handover technique is not independent attempts, someone guiding the writing, an adult guiding the writing, and so this is not writing. That is not going to help the process of writing. Dictation, so dictating to someone information and they write it down. This is also not writing, because it will not allow the students to generate ideas. Chunked phrases using a name stamp is a matching task. Pressing a button to reveal a pre-stored message is a starting point, but is not a product of writing, and this is important to think about it and think about it so that we don't stop here. It's okay to start at this point, but we have to have a plan to move it on. Worksheets help, but it's also, it's a starting point. We cannot stop here there, and we need to give opportunities for our learners to be able to talk and generate ideas in writing. What are the skills required to write? So first we have the input methods, and this could be using a pencil, could be using typing, using a hardware keyboard or as on-screen keyboard, could be using other input methods like eye gaze, which to access on-screen keyboards. This requires some kind of motor skills, but motor skills that are efficient, and they help and enable the person to be able to access the full alphabet. It has print awareness, and this involves mechanics, which is the knowledge that words are separated by spaces. It is recognizing the difference between symbols, including alphabetic letters versus numerals versus punctuation, the purpose of punctuation and capital letters, understanding that most printed words are read the same way each time. For example, W-O-U-L-D always would be would. Then we have directionality, and this involves knowing and awareness that we start from top of the paper to read, to write, and that the writing direction is from left to right. And this, the learners will learn by seeing other people doing it. Then we have composition, and this is the meaning embedded within the text. So even when we are writing, when we are composing, we have a purpose, we have a meaning. And it involves therefore cognitive skills, so it has the attention to task, interest in sharing of information, understand the need to write, and our learning style. And then it also involves language. So the fact that we are able to talk about something, able to generate ideas in language, that is an important skill which we require so that we can put it into writing. Why foster writing? Writing is required in almost all our daily activities. As an occupational therapist, we call them occupations. And these are all the tasks that we do during the day. And we use writing during the day to write messages in cards, to write messages and comments on social media, to write grocery lists, could be by pen, could be on typing it on our mobile, whatever works for us, writing to-do lists, leaving messages to family members. It gives us insight into the individual's current understanding because we're seeing about their ideas, what they want to communicate with us, etc. It enables social participation. It enables academic participation. Individuals who write get better readers and writers and thinkers, and this is what the research is showing us. Some individuals may learn to access written communication via writing, while others may learn to access spoken communication via writing, and we're going to see this in our examples. Individuals with significant disabilities benefit from the same literacy experience and instruction approaches used with typical developing children. So if we look at what Cambourne in 1993 and 2003 talked about the conditions of literacy learning, especially when we are teaching typical developing children, we look at high expectations. So as adults teaching and talking to these learners, we are our expectations are high. We are actively engaged with them, freedom to experiment in order to become problem solvers. Approximations, errors are accepted and celebrated. Loads and loads of modeling, 24/7 immersion. Foster rich social interactions, lots of talk and fun, attribute meaning to all attempts that they do, and celebration of these attempts. So what happens with individuals who have learning disabilities? Most of the time, their time is taken by medical appointments, therapies, and other challenges that families face when coping with a disability, leaving less time for literacy immersion. The nature of the disability may limit exposure to print and writing. Example, wheelchair users, they cannot move around to see and explore the environment, so then they might miss on print if they have a visual impairment. If print is not presented to them in an accessible way, they will not be able to see it around them. Sometimes we see that there is low expectations and erroneous beliefs about development. People often find it difficult to interact with a non-verbal individual, and therefore there is not a lot of language modeling. Adults may believe that individuals with disabilities, especially significant ones, are not yet ready for literacy. So lack of literacy-rich activities risk that these learners will not move and develop towards conventional literacy skills. Current research is showing that individuals with significant disabilities can progress in literacy when immersed in a rich emergent literacy activities and the appropriate tools and adaptations to access literacy, including writing, are available. So reflecting on the small steps we do with typical developing students is very important so that we can create the same interactions and experiences for individuals with learning disabilities. So how to foster writing? First, we have to make sure you are providing a variety of writing tools, including the use of technology. We have to accept all forms of writing. Model writing using the learner's preferred writing tool, and write about favorite topics and for real reasons. So we need to encourage and help these learners to talk about their favorite topics, and then we write about them. So it is about construction of meaning through text, which is finally the ultimate goal of instruction. Soft skills such as spelling, handwriting, or typing, punctuation, and grammar usage are important, but their importance is determined by how much they help the writer in composing meaningful text. It is not the first thing that we look at, especially when we are working with emergent writers, because with emergent writers we would want to help them understand that they can generate ideas, and those ideas they can put them on paper, and we want them to be to increase their confidence in doing that. So writing instruction should be systematic and include opportunities every day for each child to construct their own writing. So exploration and active construction. With especially, so it's good to prompt them, to support them, but it's also good to give them that space that they can generate writing independently. So when consider alternative pencils, when learners cannot independently access traditional writing utensils, example pencils, pens, and crayons, that gives them access to all the 26 letters in English or the 30 letters in Maltese alphabet. When the pencil they are using is not efficient, causing fatigue and taking a lot of brain power, and the learner is thus finding it hard to concentrate on the function of writing. Learners do not need to know their letters or colors to start using an alternative pencil. Function develops first and then form. Learners learn about pencils and letters by writing. Early writing is a perfect way to work on motor skills and letter knowledge. So these are some examples of low-tech alternative pencils. We have the first picture on the left is using a flip chart. And then we can use also a low-tech method with a keyboard layout. This is a QWERTY layout, so it could be starting with that also as a low-tech method, and also so that there will be easier transition also to the keyboard. On the right-hand side, we are also seeing flip charts. One on the top is for visually impaired. There is high contrast, and the one at the bottom is for persons who use eye pointing to communicate, so that they use eye pointing to access also and point to the letters that they want to use. In the middle, we have magnetic letters, and yes, magnetic letters is another efficient pencil that can be used for a learner to produce text. Here we have examples of on-screen keyboards. So this is Keybill is from Assistiveware, and KeyToGo is also from Assistiveware. Keybill is an accessible keyboard designed for iOS. For the iOS system. It is designed to make it easier and faster for people with physical and visual impairments to type, and also has features to support dyslexics, and has also predictive text. So these are predictive text is an accommodation that can help learners to generate text. KeyToGo is a simpler layout, as you can see, for those children who just started to type and read, and it also have predictive text. Then in the middle, we have SwiftKey on-screen keyboard, which is available now only on Android, because recently this year, Microsoft stopped supporting on-screen keyboard, Swift on-screen keyboard on iOS platforms because of lots of issues that they had to keep it updated. This is touchscreen. So a touchscreen is an access method which will facilitate access to on-screen keyboards, word banks, so other accommodations. So it will be the access method towards accessing literacy-based software and on-screen keyboards. Alternative mice also is that we have trackballs, joysticks, and other ergonomic vertical mouse, which are also a way to access on-screen keyboards, word prediction, and word banks. Alternative mice, here we are using, we are looking at alternative mice that use head access. So these are, you have a camera attached on the computer, and this will take through infrared, it will recognize a silver dot on your positioned on your head or on your glasses, and this will be transmitted, and this will be translated into mouse movements. Eye tracking is also having a camera which will detect eye movements, and it will translate those into mouse movements, and so they can then use it to access on-screen keyboards, word predictors, also word banks, etc. And then on the right-hand side, we are seeing mouse that can be accessed via mouse. There are keyboards, colored keyboards, high contrast keyboards, small keyboards. These are all other input methods, alternative pencils that can support a person having an efficient way of producing text. And an example here, another example is this labeler, which can also be used to as an alternative pencil. How to know where to start? The first step is recognizing the developmental level of writing so that you can foster the next step. We remember that function is first to develop, that is, adults talk about scribbling as drawing, interpreting their drawings as text, and then form. So form is not the first thing we consider, but it's the function that we need to focus on first. And the developmental level of writing is work that has been done by Starm et al., who have looked at the steps that happens from scribbling to emergent writer and to conventional writing. There are two types of writers. There are the emergent writer, who is a beginning writer who is learning to use written language to express communicative intent. So you start from drawing towards scribbling and then writing letters. And then they move to conventional writer, who is the learner who is composing words and sentences that are intelligible to a reader. So here we're going to see the descriptors of the work that Starm et al. Did on the writing developmental levels. So at level 1, we will be seeing drawing, and this means lines and curves that appear to represent objects, and this is seen if someone is using a pencil or a crayon. With an alternative pencil, we don't see this level. Then at level 2, we are seeing, we'll see scribbling, and this is continuous vertical, circular, or wavy lines arranged linearly across the page, which may include letter-like forms, but with most shapes not recognized as letters. This level is not used and not seen if someone is using a keyboard. Developmental level 3, we will be seeing letter in strings, no groups. An example of handwriting we can see in the middle. So you could see the letters next to each other, and then we have an example of when someone is using a keyboard. So for someone using a keyboard, we'll be seeing only from developmental level 3. So they might spend some time working at this level because they might be also scribbling with the keyboard and exploring the keyboard. Level 4, we will see letter strings grouped into words. So you can see that the learner is now developed spacing. He knows that groups of letters equals words and that words are separated by spaces. And we have also an example of when someone uses a keyboard. Level 5, we'll see one intelligible word, and here we could see pig, and then the other words we are not able to read. And for an alternative pencil, we will start using word bank and word prediction software, or if the person can use flip chart, they might use flip chart as well. And there is an